Hi, this is Kaushal Katari with SecureGuard Consulting. In our last module, we talked about understanding how web links and URLs and links are formed and what the various components of each are. And we talked about the different protocols available, the domain names, top-level domains, secure versus unsecure and encrypted websites. This time, we're going to go over a few examples. And as we go through these, we'll talk about each. So if we look at the following URL, http://microsoft-securitycenter.com. The question here is this a legitimate or not a legitimate URL? Meaning, illegitimate would mean if the hacker or anybody else could own the website outside of Microsoft. In this case, this would be considered not a legitimate email. This domain of MicrosoftSecurityCenter.com is actually owned by SecureGuard Consulting. And the main thing that gives it away is the fact that we have this dash in the middle. It is just another name. It happens to include the name Microsoft in there. However, this would not be considered a legitimate URL. How about the following? So if we look at this, we know the http:// indicates that it's the hypertext transfer protocol used to deliver web pages to your web browser. Then we look at Microsoft.com. And it's reasonable to assume that yes, this is a legitimate domain name. Now what about what's following after? /file.txt. What /file.txt is telling us is that on the web server housing Microsoft.com, when we type this into the web address, that we are looking for the file named file.txt. This happens to be a legitimate type of URL. How about this domain name? secure-microsoft.com. I think we saw this above with the above URL saying Microsoft-securitycenter.com. This is a similar situation that can get somewhat confusing since we do include a similar file.txt at the end. However, this would not be a legitimate URL. How about the following? The domain name itself is right here, Microsoft.com, and that is legitimate. /file.txt simply indicates that we're looking for the file called file.txt on the web server of Microsoft.com. Now how about this? Above, on the above example, we have secure-microsoft.com. And now we have secure.microsoft.com. Anything that starts with something dot and then the legitimate domain names behind it is considered a subdomain. And so we can create subdomains, and these are legitimate things to do. So this URL is considered legitimate. It can get confusing though, and that's one thing that we're going to talk about as far as this being an error-prone technique. However, it's important for you to understand, once you can get over any emotion or any lack of critical thinking that there may be following an emotional trigger in response to an email. In order to understand whether it's a legitimate URL, we now know that dashes are literally part of the name, and anyone can reserve anything with a legitimate domain name using the dash. However, using the dot symbol before tells us that it is a subdomain and it is legitimate. And this example, is it legitimate? Microsoft.com, we see that, and we know that is a legitimate domain name. Now how about the rest of this? Does any of this change whether this is legitimate? /secure without any type of file extension like .txt or .doc or .xls or .xls or any type of file extension indicates that we are looking at a folder called secure on the web server of Microsoft.com, and within that folder we are looking for a file called file.txt on the web server within the folder called secure. Now this is unencrypted, however, this would be considered a legitimate domain name. Now let's take a look at this link. I made this small on purpose because it would mimic how it would show up in your email address bar. If you take a look at the following, does this look like a legitimate URL? If we blow it up, it might make even more sense. If we notice, this hacker has used the letters R and N together to make it look like an M, to possibly make it look like Microsoft.com. If we take a closer look though, we can tell definitely this is not a legitimate URL. This is an example of the various techniques hackers will use to disguise URLs that are not legitimate as those that are. It's important to keep these in mind and to realize that this process can be error prone.